Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the Trust Fundraising Hub. My name is Beth Upton. I am a consultant at Money Tree Fundraising. We specialise in major donor trust fundraising and capital appeals. I have been fundraising for about 19 years, I think this week, in fact 19 years, which is scary. And so I know most things about most types of fundraising, and certainly will say if I don't know the answer. You are welcome to ask any comment, write in the comments for any questions you have, and I will answer them as I go along. If there's any technical issues and I miss any questions, and that does happen, then I will answer them afterwards. While people are joining, and hello and welcome, I will get started with some questions I've received over the last couple of months, and start with some stuff that's come up recently. One is around, well, in fact, two of them are around freelance fundraisers. So obviously something I know a bit about, as we manage a team of freelancers who go into different clients' offices. Freelancers should be paid a day rate and not a success rate. That's the first thing. So when you pay a salary, you simply pay a salary. You know that you don't pay your salaried staff a significant amount of their money based on commission for money raised. And a freelancer should be no different. There are lots of reasons, moral and impact and team based reasons why you shouldn't put the all of the onus on the trust fundraiser, whether they are in-house or freelance, because it is frankly a team effort. And but the other reason why you pay a day rate or an hourly rate rather than a commission based thing is that if your fundraiser in any discipline of fundraising is not an employee and they solicit a donation, and in trust fundraising terms that means they send out a trust application in their own name, they are legally obligated, and you as the charity are the people who have the legal obligation, in fact, for them to make a valid solicitation statement. So if you've ever had a phone ask from a charity or a face-to-face ask, you're familiar with it. It says, you know, hello, I'm employed by X agency on behalf of Y charity to ask you for a donation today. The money that is raised is, you know, I'm paid a fixed salary, and the agency will be paid a fixed fee, and that's coming out of unrestricted funds, and we're expecting to raise X over the course of the campaign. That's a solicitation statement, and trust fundraising needs to be no different. So that brings me on to solicitation statements. So they are legally obligatory. You can't get away from them if your freelancer solicits donations, and the legal obligation sits with the charity, so it should sit on your risk register. It's under the Charities Act if you want to look it up. Now what we do is we don't send applications. Now that might make us sound like we're really rubbish at trust fundraising. What we do in these situations, which we're in every day, is we do agree a solicitation statement with all of our clients, just so that we've got that there in case. But what we actually do is we draft the applications and we send them back to our clients, so back to the in-house member of staff to send themselves. So there's reasons for that. Our clients will always know what we're writing in our applications, and they will always know that it's on point and we're not making additional or silly promises on behalf of services that they can't deliver or don't want to deliver. Our client will always know how much work we're doing because they will see every application that's going, so they will know our work rate. And if it goes out in our client's name, then that bond between the funder and the charity can start. You know, it's just that important thing of having it in your name and all the rest of it. So those are the three main reasons we do it. And then obviously there doesn't need to be a solicitation statement, so there isn't that awkward moment of having to do that and that potential barrier. But, you know, if going back, if you were paying your trust fundraiser a commission or a success rate or a per application rate, the way you pay them has to be in that solicitation statement. And I have asked many trusts over the years, what would you think if a percentage of your grant went on paying the fundraiser directly? And to a person, everyone I've asked, and it isn't, you know, necessarily an accurate sample set, but let me tell you, no one has said that would be fine. Everyone has said, oh no, I think we would think twice about that. So those are the questions I've had about freelancers. In terms of day rates, they vary wildly, and you're going to get a different day rate with an agency like ours because we offer a lot of wraparound services in terms of support and backup and one thing and another. Whereas if you went for a sole person, you would expect a lower day rate and you wouldn't expect to have to pay VAT either. And that's because, if that person goes sick, then that you've got no one else to do the work. With an agency, you've got that kind of cover. So there's pros and cons to both. Obviously, everyone tries to remain budget conscious, but you're probably looking at between £240–250 a day for a really good trust fundraiser, all the way up to 400 plus VAT, maybe 450 plus VAT, that kind of thing at the top end for an agency. And like I say, I don't necessarily think the rate means that you're getting a better person. We have freelancers who work directly for those lowest rates and work through us at the higher end of that. But what you are getting is an amount of support and wraparound from the agency. And if you were searching and those were the decisions you were thinking about, the agency is about how do they support you if things go wrong, or what kind of backup does the associate get, and what kind of team approach is there. That's what you're looking for, rather than a straight kind of more money equals more expertise. So there's that. Still haven't had any live questions, so I'm going to keep going with my pre-delivered ones, but jump in at any time, write your question down if you've got one. So the next question that's come up this month is around buying data for a trust fundraising function. And obviously there are agencies and companies out there who will sell you a list of trusts. And my view is that isn't a great way to spend your money unless you're buying quite a small, specific list and it's really well qualified. That's what I would say. So my reason for saying that is if you are new to trust fundraising and you don't know where to start, first of all, come on here and find out. And you've got the Charity Excellence Framework, but also you can go to the Charity Commission. If you're based in England and Wales, you can just go onto the Charity Commission's website and do a basic search using their advanced search function, and you will come up for free with your long list of trusts. And regardless of where you get that list from, your next job is to then go and research them all one by one. That is part of your job as a trust fundraiser, to really get under the skin of that trust and learn about them and work out exactly where you can fit your proposals into their priorities and what the match is. And buying a list will not remove that job from your to-do list. However, there is a space for a prospect list. And what I would say is hire a good freelancer. And again, a freelance prospect researcher is probably a bit cheaper than a freelance trust fundraiser, and they will be able to do X number of trusts per day, and they will take your case for support and your really clear brief, and it's obviously important you give them a really clear brief of exactly what aspect of your work you're looking to get funded. And they will take your existing list, they will qualify it and say you should get more here, less here, these people's criteria change, these are temporarily closed, that kind of updating of your pipeline. But also they can then go, do you know what, these people are missing and should be on this list as well. And that, although it might cost a similar amount of money, I don't know what these lists sell for, but I'm assuming it's hundreds. So if you spend a couple of £100 on a day's research, couple of days research, you should be able to come up with something more useful and tangible. But there's nothing that is going to get away from the fact that part of your job as a trust fundraiser is I'm going to apply to this trust today. The first thing I've got to do is up-to-date research on exactly where they're at today, if today is the day I'm sending the application in. There's nothing that you can pay for to avoid that part of your job. So I hope that's helpful. Megan, hello. Megan is new to her role as a trust fundraiser, wondering if I have any tips on how to form good relationships with a trust. Essential questions we would be asking at the initial conversation with them. Well, I want to say, firstly, well done for thinking relationships, Megan. That's absolutely the right way. Not all trusts have the capacity to build relationships with us. So although that is the kind of the gold standard in relationships, we can't expect it of all of them. So if people don't want to take a phone call, they don't want to build a relationship, there comes a point where you mustn't take it personally and you've got to be more transactional with them. And that's just the way of things. So in terms of, I literally would just pick up the phone. So I think you just start by picking up the phone. If they publish a phone number, simply pick up the phone and go, hello, I'm so-and-so. So if they're an existing funder, you go, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm new to post, I understand you're already a funder with us. I would love to hear how you find the experience of funding us. you know, and listen to their feedback. So perhaps your predecessor was particularly creative in their reports and did lots of real creative stuff, and they found that good, or maybe they found that awful. I've had that feedback before. Well, so your predecessor always used to send us lots of lovely documents with photos, but the truth is we have to print everything for our trustees, and that costs us a lot of money in the printer. We'd rather just have words. We appreciate the effort, but that's not working for us. So give them the opportunity to give you free feedback if they're an existing funder. If they're a new funder and you're trying to build a relationship, obviously the other thing you need to think about in terms of relationships is start with smaller asks and build up your trust level with them. So they will give you small amounts of money generally to begin with, and then over time you can ask for a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. That would be a good way to build trust and rapport. Is you give us £5,000, we do the reporting, we deliver the outcomes you say. Next year we'll ask for a bit more. But the other thing, so you're having this first phone call with a new trust, right? So they've never funded you before and all the rest of it. Pick up the phone. Hello, I'm phoning from such and such. Is now a good time? I'd really like to explore your funding priorities to make sure that I'm writing an appropriate application. So make sure that they know there's something in it for them. And what's in it for a trust administrator is not having loads of stupid applications that don't meet the criteria. That's really easy. You know, they're overworked, and you think of all those applications they get. They want quality, and if they want to have a conversation with you, then they want to help steer you towards what that means. And then, you know, say, well, I was thinking of submitting for X. I wanted to ask you how that fits within your criteria for the next funding round. I know lots of trusts who will say that they support these, say, 8 to 10 things broadly, but that, you know, at any given trustee meeting, they're looking to really fund this one or this one or this one, or, you know, they've accidentally overfunded this bit this year, and so they really need to spend the rest of their funding there to satisfy their own in-house rules about how they split their funding. And having those conversations is how you learn that, you know. And oh, well, our funding wouldn't suit what you're prioritising now, so would it be better if I held my application off for a quarter or 6 months? You know, just lots of questions to help them feel that you're listening and that you're making their life as easy as possible. That's what I would say. I hope that's helpful. Hello, Harry. Harry asks, what is your opinion of trusts that say predominantly support charities based in a specific geographic area, or focus on charities but do support others? If you're outside of their main area, is it worth still applying? So 2 things. See, everything I just said to Megan about phoning and asking, I recognise that not everyone will let you do that. See if you can go through their annual report and see the reality of that. So if they mainly support one specific county and they say, but we will support others, it might just be a catch-all for pet projects from trustees. That's what that would be my gut instinct would say. There's probably no point, because unless I'm known to a trustee and they can put me forward as a pet project. But, you know, go through their last couple of annual reports and accounts and see if you can identify grants outside of that area. And then have a look at that, you know, again, kind of, and then look at the charities website, the flip, to see if you can work out both sides of that story. So it could well be that you suddenly twig that the trustee of your trust is a trustee of that charity, and they're not geographically in the area, but they're still giving, and that would mean probably not, like, it's probably not worth your while. But equally, if it's a really straightforward application and it's like a couple of hours worth of application, and you know that cause-wise you're in absolutely the right place, and you've got you've submitted this application to others, so it's not going to take you tons of time, then there's no harm. And maybe in the cover letter you I acknowledge that trusts predominantly support Y county, but I can see from your annual reports and accounts you have funded things in our area previously, and I hope you consider our application on that basis. And just, I think, open with it. Like, you do say you're open to supporting others. So I'm gonna try. That's what I would say. Megan, hello again, really helpful. How many applications is realistic to get out? So application level is one of the other pre-written questions, actually, so thanks for bringing that up, Megan. Applications vary wildly, and that's you know what I was saying about the day rate rather than even application rate, which I heard someone suggest for a freelancer recently. An application might be 10 days solid work, of working with the services delivery team, getting the work, getting the background. I mean, I remember doing an application to, who was it? It was the landfill tax credits. It was many, many moons ago, and it filled 3 lever arch folders, all of the paperwork for that one application. It was hard work. There was lots of writing, but there was also lots of information gathering. There was lots of policies and procedures and gumph that they needed to see. And you know, ultimately it was worth it. And I can't remember how much we got. It was a very long time ago, and it was capital appeal, so it's not necessarily relevant. But you know, it was hard work, and it took a lot of effort, and it was like 3 lever arch folders full. And a big application can be like that. You know, it can be reams and reams and reams, but you end up with 6 figures or 7 figures, or you know, 100 grand every year for the next 3 years. Equally, they don't necessarily weigh out on time versus money. That's the other thing to say. So it's hard to say how long an application will take, and it's hard to say how much money you'll get at the end of it. So equally, I used to do an application for a charity I worked for donkeys years ago, and it was roughly, I mean donkeys years ago, we're talking 15 or more years ago I did this, and it was roughly 100 grand a year for 3 years at a time. And then there was a report, and the report was each year was as onerous as the application, and it was like 3 sides of A4, and that was it. And it because we applied for the same thing time and time again, and we just needed to do update reports. I think it took like 2 hours a time. So for the same amount of money, on one occasion I spent 10 solid days, and it was a one-off grant of hundreds of thousands of pounds. And another occasion I was spending hours a year managing a grant for the same amount. So it really does depend on the grant maker. The big ones are worth the effort. So, you know, it is worth putting in days and days of effort for a Garfield Western, or a Reaching Communities bid is another big application. What I always used to do is have a sort of a list of, I mean, they were researched prospects, but like small trusts, small family trusts, where all you're ever going to do is write a 2-sided application with a cover letter. They have no form, there's no process they publish. You're just sending a letter saying, I can see that you fund similar projects, here's our project, would you consider a gift of? And it might be hundreds, and it might be small amounts of thousands of pounds. But you've done the research to know that they fund your area geographically, they fund your area in terms of cause, and that's roughly the right amount of money to give. I used to have a hat at the end of my desk, and I had ripped out loads, I printed the names off of these ones, and I had them in a hat, literally like a lottery. On a Friday after lunch, I would come in and I would take one out of the hat, and my Friday afternoon job was to write an application to this trust cold and get it out the door. So half a day is perfectly reasonable. Once you get into the craft of writing, you find that it's like any muscle. You the more you use it, the better it works, and the more you practice it, the better it works. So you know, there's that. And frankly, Megan, until you know, it would be a case of what's your pipeline look like, how mature is your program, how much prospect research do you have to do versus applications, how worked up are your cases for support, how many case studies have you got, how much work have you got to do with your other team. Trust fundraising is so much bigger than just writing that it's not very fair to put targets in like that would be broad across all charities. Which is probably not what you wanted to hear, sorry. No other live questions. I'm going to skip back to the ones that have been written. I wanted to talk about, so we've done that one, and we've done that one, and we've done that one. That's great. Actually kind of following on from what Meg has written, there's something came up in the chat this month about objectives and KPIs, key performance indicators for a trust fundraiser. I wanted to kind of really say that you should be being measured on everything, not just on the writing. So if you think through what's important as a trust fundraiser, there should be some kind of KPI or objective around keeping your pipeline up to date, whatever that looks like. So your objective this year might be creating a pipeline, and next year it might be updating it or maintaining it or whatever. So there's something about your pipeline. You've got to have this number of trusts that you can apply to, and then you apply to that number, and then you get grants from that number. So you've got that. So there's something about pipeline. There needs to be something about cross-departmental working. Trust fundraisers really, really cannot operate in a vacuum. You are applying predominantly for project funding, and those projects are delivered by your service delivery team, so you really need to have good working relationships with finance, with service delivery, with the lot. That's also got to be around, I would say that you should have objectives around those case studies or stories, whatever it is you want to call it, whether that's you having the bank of them or it sits somewhere else in the team. They've got to be appropriate for trust fundraising purposes. They've got to be new. They've got to work for the specific projects you're applying for. They've got to be authorised, all of that stuff around a kind of a case study bank. And then also something around having your cases for support written. So if you work in an organisation that has 12 projects, you might have a kind of overarching thing about your organisation, but you probably have specific cases for support for each of those projects because that's what you're writing your applications for. And maintaining an up-to-date sort of library of what is it you're applying for so that you can take that off the shelf and adapt it for each application is actually a really useful thing. Again, some organisations that sits outside of trusts and someone else does that. Still needs to be an objective in your organisation, and you need to influence to make sure that what is being written by someone else is suitable for you as a trust fundraiser. Then in terms of, you should probably have a return on investment in there. You need to have something about money. It is actually about the money, right? But as I've already said, I wouldn't say number of applications out is necessarily a good metric, but there's something about applying to new trusts. There's something about reactivating lapsed trusts. There's something about making sure you are focused on the multi-year as well as the annual. There's something about relationships in there, and I think how those are worded depends on how strict your objectives need to be. And I think someone else said this on the Trust Fundraising Hub when this came up recently. As a manager, sometimes you put those objectives in just to help people keep it front of mind that is part of their job, and some people might find it more natural to think, am I reactivating the right amount of lapsed? Am I making sure I'm going for multi-year? And other people might focus on the date and the kind of more immediate stuff in front of them, which is more just about writing this application and not really thinking through, if I have this much time in a year, how much should I dedicate to multi-year, which can be quite tough? How much should I dedicate to lapsing? How much should I dedicate to new? And how much should I dedicate to reporting? That's the other one I haven't mentioned. So there's the kind of the grant facing ones, which are around asks, lapsed, multi-year, relationships, new, and reporting. And then there's maybe the organisational stuff that also needs objectives, which is around relationships, case studies, cases for support, good working relationships, that kind of stuff. And then there's the kind of the stuff for you, which is making sure you're on top of your admin. It can be useful, especially as a manager, to put that in there. There's something about being good at keeping on top of your admin, whether that's putting it in a database or a spreadsheet, and something about your pipeline. And then, I think no objectives are complete without a personal development one, and that can be quite broad. That could be reading a book, that could be taking part in a conversation like today, making sure you've logged in and watched the Trust Fundraising Hub or attended a conference. It doesn't have to have budget attached to it, I guess is what I'm saying. But we internally at Money Tree Fundraising call that our sword sharpening, and every month all of us, so me included, have to come up with a way we will be sharpening our swords this month, and then we have to say at the end of the month how we got on with that progress. And that varies wildly from I've signed up to a conference which has cost the organisation some money, to I'm reading this book this month, to actually I'm doing this really interesting other thing. It's just as long as it's kind of stretching your mind and developing you, that's what we think is okay. So I can't believe it. We've only got 5 minutes left. I feel a bit out of practice, and I'll be honest, I'm a bit in the throat. I should have brought some water with me. So if anyone has got any questions, then now is the big moment to drop in and ask questions in the comments. Otherwise, I have got one further one that was pre-asked, which is around response rates post-pandemic. And my prediction from the moment the trusts stepped in last year and created the COVID funds, and they closed some of their business as usual stuff, the capital things, and they really stepped up, right? They really can't say more than that. I mean, there were some challenges around the types of organisations they funded, and it wasn't perfect, but as always, trusts said, okay, this is an emergency, we need to give lots of money. From that moment, my suspicion, and it remains a suspicion, has been that a lot of them will have eaten into their capital. So if you understand, most trusts invest their capital, their lump sum, and what they give away is the return on investment each year. So they might make £10 million in dividends, and that's what they spend, but the actual capital remains there. And if they've spent some of their capital, that means that their returns on investments will be smaller, and they will either then just always be smaller, or they will take some of their return on investment to rebuild that capital back to where it was before. We saw it happen after the financial crash in the early noughties, and the trust stepped up then. And then what happened was, it was almost like other types of fundraising were affected immediately, and then trust fundraising was affected later, because you had this false support. Absolutely vital for charities, absolutely the right thing to do, but you had this false support by trusts that couldn't be maintained more than a year or two, which is what we've seen with pandemic funding, and then it dropped to below the level of what it was before the financial crash, and that was because they'd spent some of their capital, which they had to rebuild, and they weren't making the returns because we were in a recession. And if you look at the stock market now and different things, there's so much turmoil with Brexit, with COVID, that's outside of giving and outside of charities, that I think it would be fair to say that they probably haven't been making the returns that they were making in the good years. And so it might take longer to replenish those stocks than it would have been before it happened. And so what I'm predicting is that we will continue to see this lag. Now, we won't know if what I'm saying is true for another year or two, because what we'll have to do is take those grant makers' annual reports over a couple of years and see what they report in terms of their assets, and if the assets have dropped considerably. And then there'll be a narrative in that report explaining why the assets have dropped, and that will be around, we stepped up to help because of COVID, and what the trustees' plan is for the future. And we have decided we can run satisfactorily at a lower asset level, so the giving will then stay whatever the post-COVID thing is, or we will be rebuilding our assets over this time frame, and blah blah blah. So we won't know for sure if I'm telling something. I'm not telling the truth, because obviously I'm not fibbing, but if my prediction is accurate, I mean to say, until that happens. But that is my prediction, is that we have seen this huge spike in grants. So if you're being asked to do projections, it's really hard, right? Because a lot of organisations did super well and now think that they should invest in trusts because that's gonna maintain, and that's really tricky. So what I suggest is that you go back and look at what your grant level was pre-pandemic, and you don't predict any growth on that. So you look at that, or maybe modestly a little bit lower, if I'm honest, because there has been an increase in asking. And so your fixed pool of trusts, which might now so there's a fixed pool of money from trusts and foundations. My prediction is this year that's a bit smaller, but I don't know for sure. But what I do know is that fixed pot is being requested by more organisations than ever before. So they're either going to divide it, or some organisations are going to miss out, because it is a fixed pot. There isn't an infinite sum of money. And so we are seeing lower response rates. So a warm response rate used to be 1 in 4. We're now seeing it as 1 to 10 in 12. We're seeing cold response rates as much as 1 in 25. The more targeted you can be, the more relationship driven you can be, the less scattergun you can be, the better your response rates are. Well, that's also what we're seeing with our team. And it will slowly come down again, and you will end up back in those really warm response rates if you're good at trusts, you've got a good proposition for them, and you can develop relationships. But what it does mean is just that we've got this short-term kind of spike in difficult times. It's almost like the income for the last couple of years was maybe front loaded last year and a bit this year. And I hope that insight is helpful. As ever, I'm here. Obviously, we've had a bit of a break. I hope you all managed to have a good summer. But I'm here on the third Thursday of every month at 12:15 for half an hour, live here on the Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook. So next month's event is the 21st of October at 12:15. So put that in your diary. Please come along. Please share it with your teams. If you can't come live, post your question to me in advance. And as I've done today, I'll run through the questions and answer them. And by probably tomorrow, although I won't commit her to it right now, my wonderful colleague Jocelyn will have taken this video and put it on our YouTube page. So if you know people who would benefit from this and want to see previous ones, or you think your question was answered and you're not sure where to go, then you're always welcome to go to our YouTube page, which is we put that on the Trust Fundraising Hub, on our Money Tree Fundraising Facebook page, and on our Twitter handles, which is at MoneyTreeFR and at Trust Fundraise as well. And thank you for those of you who've joined us, and I hope that's been useful and helpful. If you would like this to be different in the future, I'm always open to some feedback, but have great fun doing Trust Fundraising, and hopefully see some of you next month. Bye for now.